Wagwan, good morning, good evening, and good night. Welcome to episode 2 of Dude, It's Not That Hard. The show where we simplify concepts for you. Last episode, we spoke about building our story. So today, we'll talk about building a protagonist. Alright, what's a protagonist? Put simply, the protagonist is our main character. The main character drives our story forward. While the world you create doesn't have to revolve around the main character, it helps if they're a part of the world. Now, it helps to know the character arc that you want your protagonist to have. This will help you determine how they interact with the people in the story that you want to create. Now, there are 3 types of character arcs that are most common. You have the positive arc, you have the negative arc, and you have the flat character arc. Now, as the word may suggest, a positive character arc is when a character goes through a positive change throughout the story. So maybe your character started off as really weak at the beginning of the story, and by the end of the story, they become super strong. Or they may have started off as being really evil in the beginning of the story, and by the end of the story, they become the hero. In my story, Lume is a cowardly lion cub, and he doesn't want to be that coward anymore. So he ventures all across Africa in order to find a magical object that he hears about that will give him courage. Now, throughout the story, he goes on all these different adventures and he meets all these trials and tribulations that he has to overcome. However, at the end of the story, he realizes that there was no magical object. And the fact is that he himself had to find courage within himself in order to make that journey. So the positive arc is he started off as being very cowardly, but throughout the story, he found courage within himself and he became a strong, courageous lion at the end of it. Now, on the opposite spectrum is the negative character arc. This is where sometimes the person may start off as being very courageous, and by the end of the story, they become very cowardly. Or they may have started off as the hero of the story, and by the end of the story, they become the villain. In my story, Journey of Cabo, the main villain, Kivuli, starts off as your everyday prince of one of the most successful countries in Africa. But through years of war and with the killing of his parents, he then decides to go on a tirade that takes him on a journey that throughout the story makes him more and more malicious and unfortunately more and more evil. Now, in the middle, you have what is called the flat character arc. This is where the character's personality or character arc may stay the same from the beginning to the end. Now, some of you may be asking, well, what's the purpose of a flat character arc then if they don't progress through the story? That sounds kind of boring. Well, the cool thing about flat character arcs is that usually the flat character changes the people around them rather than they themselves change. We have many examples of this. Say, for example, in Dragon Ball Z, Goku stays the same from the beginning of Dragon Ball all the way up to Dragon Ball Z and Dragon Ball Super. He pretty much is the same goofy character, but if you notice, all the characters around him, they are the ones who change because of him. There are a lot of different nuances of character arcs that you can go through as well. There's nothing really set in stone. Now, after we figured out the kind of character arc that we want to right, the next thing is we want to actually create our protagonist. Now again, nothing is set in stone, but there are some things that you want to follow when writing a good protagonist. The first thing you want to do is figure out their profile. The character profile tells us most of what we want to know about the character. Like the basics. What is their name? How old are they? What gender or sex are they? Are they rich or poor? Are they flamboyant? Are they very serious all the time? What is their favorite food? All these things shape this person's personality. You also want to know their history. Maybe they were bullied as a child, and maybe because they were bullied as a child, that changes their temperament. Who was their first love? Their first love can shape how they interact with other people around them. Were their parents killed? Did their planet explode one day while they were going for a walk or some sort? What was something that happened in the world that affected our protagonist? All these things may give them what we need also, to give them a motivation of some sort. So our character needs to be motivated to go towards a goal as well. And in that pursuit of that goal, it gives them something that they can lose. All of these things come together to make our character relatable, which is the most important thing you want in a protagonist, to make them relatable to you or to your reader. And when we stir up this soup of character profile, history, motivation, and character development, then our protagonist can have an interesting character arc. So for example, in my story, Journey of Cabo, Cabo is 21 years old. He lives in ancient Tanzania, which is East Africa. He is a cattle herder, and his temperament tends to be kind of brash, always trying to prove himself as being brave. Now, the history of why he always does this is because growing up, Cabo was always bullied. And it's explained in the story why, so I won't give it away. But all of these things come together to shape his personality. Now, what makes him relatable is that he is just your everyday hero or protagonist. He has his wants, he is married to Sayase, and because of that, he loves her dearly. And so when she when she's kidnapped by a demigod, which is Kavuli, then Cabo has something that he risks losing. And because he risks losing it, it gives him the motivation to go all across Africa in order to save his wife. Now, in the world of Journey of Cabo, there's magic and there's so many different tribes and so many different cities across Africa. However, the motivation of our character, who is Cabo, is still just his wife. Now, the reader will want to explore all these different places and all these different worlds, but when you have a character that you can relate to, then they will want to go on that journey with you. Now, there are things that you want to avoid when creating your protagonists. You want to avoid things like stereotypes. No one likes being portrayed in a way that they know down in their heart they themselves wouldn't be portrayed as. Just because a character is a woman doesn't mean that they have to be all girly and frilly. Just because a character is, say, gay doesn't mean that they have to be super flamboyant and loud. Just because, for example, a character is dark-skinned doesn't mean that they have to be necessarily the villain of your story. A lot of stereotypes may come from places of some truth, but the problem with stereotypes is that they aren't the whole truth. They make a tiny piece of a group's personality become their entire story, and you don't want that. Don't be afraid to give your protagonist a range of emotions. Just because he's your hero or she's your hero doesn't mean that they need to be stoic all the time and never smile or never crack jokes. And just because they're your hero doesn't mean that they're always fearless or always flawless. Flaws and fear make people feel more human. That is a part of who we are. The cool thing about stories is you can always subvert expectations. That is what makes them so interesting. Now, as always, you don't have to take my word for it. There's so many resources out there that can help you become a better writer. There's Creating Character Arcs by K.M. Whelan. There's Build Better Characters by Eileen Cook. There's The Art of Character by David Corbett. And of course, my two favorite YouTubers, Jenna Moresi and Hello Future Me. Now, after we've written our protagonist, we need our antagonist, right? Or evil character that shapes our protagonist and drives them forward. So in the next episode, we'll be learning how to write an antagonist. Dun dun dun! It's fun writing a protagonist, creating interesting worlds and lives for them. However, it can feel like our lives aren't nearly as interesting, or even worth sticking around for. It's okay to have these thoughts, but it's not okay to dwell on them, because they simply aren't true. If you take a step back, you may see there are a lot of people who would love to have your life and would love to be a part of your life. So stand up. Breathe, rest, talk to a friend, and make sure to talk to a trained therapist. Because they care about you and want to see you succeed. Remember, I believe in you, and I'll see you in the next episode.